everyone, and welcome to the Féile and Phobail crime fiction event. My name's James Murphy, and some of you will know me as the author of the Terror Trilogy, a crime fiction series set in West Belfast, in and around the Falls Road area, and predominantly set within the old St Congol's building, or a fictionalised version of it. I'm here today to talk to you about Irish voices in crime fiction with my partner in crime for today and one of my favourite Irish voices, Sheila Bugler. Hi, Sheila.
Hi, James, and hello, everyone else. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today, James. I'm Sheila Bugler. I'm an Irish crime writer. I live in Eastbourne on the south coast of England. I've written 6 novels so far. Both of them are series. My first series was set in London, and it features a second-generation Irish detective called Ellen Kelly. And my second, more recent series is based in Eastbourne, where I live now, and those books feature an investigative journalist called Dee Doran. So that's me in a nutshell.
Perfect, and fantastic books they are too, I have to say.
Thank you.
Well, now, one of the things that certainly came across to me from your books, and one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past, is the fact that a lot of your characters seem to be of, as you mentioned, Irish descent or Irish name. There's always kind of a strong Irish thread running through your books. Can you talk to me a wee bit about that?
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? Because that's something that you picked up on very early on, James, when we first met. And it's not something I had thought about too much before, but I'm really aware of being an Irish person living outside Ireland. And it's one of the kind of sadnesses in my life really has been that I never moved back to Ireland. And I don't think I will now. Life has taken a different direction, but I always thought I would end up back in Ireland. And I think that having Irish characters in my novels is an unconscious way of me keeping that connection alive with Ireland. It's not something I thought of when I was doing it, but it's clearly very important to me to have Irish characters in my books.
And actually, just kind of on the point of creating Irish characters, you've been away, as you say, quite a while now. What kind of feedback have you been getting about the characters? I mean, I feel they are very authentically Irish, but do you worry that maybe because you've been away so long that you can't really identify with the Irish character now, if that makes sense?
Do you know what? That does make sense. And actually, again, it's not something I've thought about, but it's interesting that for both my main characters, Ellen and Dee, I made them second generation Irish instead of first generation Irish. So I wonder, in a way, again, unconsciously, if I almost see myself almost like that now, given that I'm 53 and I left Ireland when I was 21, 22. So, I've been out of Ireland for a long time. And I wonder if by making them second generation Irish, it might avoid me falling into the pitfall of creating characters that don't feel authentically Irish. I think that's a really good observation, James.
And I suppose I remember hearing Graham Norton talk about this, before his last book came out, because I think, like yourself, obviously he's based in England now, and he was saying that he shied away for a very long time of setting books in Ireland because he thought, what do I know about life in Ireland, and am I going to be a fraud and all that sort of stuff? So I kind of saw a parallel with where you were coming from, but I think, like him, you've both nailed the Irish identity, I think, really well. Now, saying that, I'm coming from the point of view of someone who lives in Northern Ireland, and that obviously creates a whole set of, I don't want to say issues around identity, but certainly talking points around identity. For example, I mentioned at the beginning, I was brought up in West Belfast in a Catholic background. But when someone said to me, "Oh, you're an Irish writer," I kind of was a little bit taken aback, because for me, the Irish voice in Irish crime fiction, I wouldn't necessarily have thought would have married up with my voice. Now, actually it does, and I think yours does too. But I just thought it was a little bit kind of not unsettling, but I think gave me something that I hadn't thought about before, and I wondered if that was something that you had ever experienced.
There's a question I want to ask you when I get to the end of what I'm going to say, so remind me. I do I feel? I think is your question. Do I sort of feel uncomfortable identifying as being Irish because I've been out of Ireland?
Later, I think.
So I'll tell you how I feel about that. What I have found very strange is that I really do feel like I'm an Irish writer, actually, but I feel, and this is completely in my head, and it's not a real situation, but I feel quite separate to the community of Irish writers living in Ireland. And I suspect that I feel separate from that, first of all, because I'm physically separate. And secondly, I think having been out of Ireland for the best part of 30 years, my cultural references have changed. So my cultural references are predominantly sort of, I guess, English, because that's where I live now. So there's a lot of stuff has happened in 30 years. And Ireland, the Ireland that I lived in, is a radically different country to the Ireland of today.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, radically, and I haven't really been part of that change. So my experience of being Irish is very different, I think, to the experience of my friends and family who never left Ireland, for example.
Oh, that's really interesting to hear. I want to talk to you about the whole idea, the protocol and all that sort of stuff a wee bit later on, taking us off the topic a little bit. But you said you wanted to ask me something first.
Yes, and I did. And then, because for me, it's very strange to hear you say that you were surprised to be described as an Irish writer. And I'd just like to know a bit more about that, maybe. Because for me, when I hear you talk, when I read what you've written, you're an Irish writer to me.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's to do with the whole kind of Northern Ireland thing, because I've grown up, obviously, with a Catholic background in West Belfast and would, in theory, identify solely as Irish. But I think, like you, my life experience has probably changed me in the sense that, yes, I identify as Irish, but actually I really identify as Northern Irish. So there's elements within the kind of Northern Irish culture that I really wholeheartedly embrace that wouldn't necessarily be something that someone living in the Republic, for example, would really grasp, if you know what I mean. So from that point of view, I do see myself as very Northern Irish. And because of that, I kind of thought that my voice was different, but actually it's not. It's just that I'm probably an amalgam of two cultures.
And in a way, I guess I'm the same, aren't I? I'm an amalgam of the culture I grew up in and the culture I'm living in now. So we're probably more alike, maybe. Do you know?
Yeah, I think completely. And that was one of the things that kind of resonated with me because, I'd heard you say in the past that you felt kind of a little bit outside the Irish writing community. Although I think the rest of the Irish writing community see you as very much a part of it.
Yes.
And from my own point of view, I was kind of thinking, well, I'm 3 books in now, working on the 4th, but I kind of saw myself on the fringes anyway. So to hear someone not only say, you're a writer, you're a crime writer, you're one of us, so you're an Irish crime writer, the whole thing was just kind of, oh, okay. And it's like those, the whole idea that you either embrace it or you run away. And I think, thankfully, I've chosen to embrace it, and things are going well so far, hopefully.
Is your 4th book going to be set in Belfast as well?
The 4th book is going to be, I live in Antrim now.
Okay.
It's going to be set predominantly in Antrim. And it's a little bit of a departure. So the others were a West Belfast series. At the moment, this one's going to be a standalone.
Okay.
And it's a completely new project. It will still be crime fiction. There will be elements of it set in Belfast.
But it's still got to be very Northern Irish then, isn't it?
It will absolutely be Northern Irish. But again, one of the reasons why I started thinking about this panel and previous conversations that we've had is when I sat down to start the first draft of the work in progress, I suddenly found myself being transported back to my teacher training days in London, which were over almost 25 years ago now. I know I look young. But yeah, I was immediately transported to Hanwell, of all places, just beside Heathrow, which is
I know Hanwell, yeah.
where I spent quite a bit of time during that year. And I suddenly had this kind of female character. So, the main character in the new book's going to be female. So I'm writing from the point of view of someone who left Northern Ireland to go and do training, in her case, a police officer, and has now returned to Northern Ireland some 20 years later with a very different identity. And I can't go too much further in now than that. So all these kind of themes were going around in my head, and suddenly, I've been chatting to you and I've been chatting to a few other writers, and I thought that would actually be a really good thing to talk about. So at the moment, I'm writing a lot about London, although the book is mainly set in Antrim.
Well, that's what's really interesting about that is because, today we're talking about Irish voices in crime fiction, and what we're both talking about a lot is identity in our fiction. And I wonder, I'd be interested to look more broadly across Irish crime fiction. And I wonder, is that kind of a theme, quite a common theme amongst Irish crime fiction, that idea of identity? Or I wonder, is it more common in sort of writers like us who feel slightly outside? I care much more about identity because I'm not living in Ireland. And I think, for example, of a writer like Tana French, who didn't grow up in Ireland, but her books, there's something very strongly Irish about, especially her Dublin Murder series.
Completely, yeah. Which I haven't actually read, but I've seen a TV adaptation of, and the Irish voice comes across. The whole identity thing, I've often wondered about that, and I have spoken to lots of other writers about it. But for me, it wasn't necessarily to do with Irish identity. It was more to do with class identity. Because certainly a lot of the crime fiction writers I know have come from a very working class background. And we all seem to kind of have the same hang-ups. None of us are, although we love having chats about our work and so on, I think none of us are really that comfortable around some of the social aspects of being a crime writer. So we love going to the events and, we love doing the panels and so on. But I think we're more at home before and after the actual event than we are when we're in the event. And a lot of that, I think, through discussion and certainly through my own feeling, came about through the idea of imposter syndrome.
I think we've spoken about this before as well, actually, that whole idea of imposter syndrome. And but I think part of that comes from not just class and not just sort of feeling like a slight outsider, like you and I have spoken about, but also I think it comes from this. We've inherited a sort of snobbishness towards crime fiction generally, which I think is changing. But in the past, the literary publishing industry, crime fiction has always felt a bit sort of second class, actually, which I don't feel like that about crime fiction, clearly, and neither do you. But I think we have suffered in the past. I think that's changing a lot now. And I think anyone who looks at crime fiction and how broad the genre is and the scope of writing within the genre of crime fiction, you couldn't sort of be snobbish about that, I don't think. I think it's just amazing.
I completely agree. And I think Ian Rankin said something along the lines of, I think someone asked him a question about literary writers and where are all the literary writers and, how come it's crime fiction that is the thing? And his response was obviously, just go and look at the Sunday Times bestsellers list. We're all over here.
Yes, that's so true. That's so true.
And I used the royal way, I have to say. I haven't been on it yet.
Neither have I.
So we alluded to this a wee bit earlier on, but obviously you've been away for quite a while now. But one of the things I noticed as well is the characters in your books being inherently Irish. Was the fact that you don't write about Ireland, but you write about where you were living at the time in each case?
Yeah, and I think so my Ellen series are those books are set in London, and then my D series those books are set in Eastbourne. And when I was writing the Ellen books, I was living in London. When I was writing the D books, I was living in Eastbourne. So I think partly choosing to write about locations I live in is possibly my way of exploring and understanding where I'm living. I think there's definitely that. I think location generally is really important to me in my writing. But also going back to the identity thing, I have tried many times to write a novel set in Ireland, and I haven't managed it. And I think that goes back to my sense of feeling outside Ireland again. My last book, Before You Were Gone, has got little scenes set in Ireland. So maybe I'm edging towards getting a book set in Ireland. I have got a book coming up, which I haven't started yet, but it'll be out sometime next year, which is about a character going back to Ireland after being away for a long time. And that's going to be really interesting to write about. I think what I'm going to find really hard is not romanticizing the country, if I'm honest. Yeah, so I'm going to have to make it real, and I'm going to struggle with that, I think, because I have got quite a romantic idea of Ireland in my head, because I love it.
Well, that's really interesting that you say that, because I think, talking as a reader rather than a writer, the kind of Irish crime fiction I'm consuming at the moment does very much kind of romanticize.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know we both know Vanessa Fox O'Loughlin, aka Sam Blake. And her most recent work, The Darkroom, some of that is set down in West. In fact, the vast majority of it is set down in West Cork. And that, to me, is a very romantic, it's almost like a big house novel.
Yes, it is.
So it has the kind of romantic version of that, but also, for me, it very much conjures up the Ireland of holidays of my childhood and so on. So, I mean, for me, that was a lovely piece of work and an example of, I think people want that kind of wee bit of, romanticized Ireland.
Maybe we want it at the moment, in fairness, I think we've all, and actually, I suppose at the moment, because I haven't been able to go back to Ireland, I'm in danger of really, really romanticizing it if I'm not careful, for the longer I'm away. And I think you're right about Sam Blake's book. I think that was very deliberate in that case in the book, wasn't it, to create that sort of beautiful, hauntingly beautiful place that she's done.
Yeah, I think so. And it certainly worked for me. And I remember saying to Vanessa that literally was, my early teens holidays,
yeah,
like that. And I think a lot of us are kind of feeling that way at the moment, especially with the idea of, people being on the island of Ireland and the whole staycation thing at the moment.
Yes.
People are looking back towards their childhood and thinking, actually, that was a really great place, and that's maybe where the family holiday is going to be this year.
Yes. Yeah, I think people are doing that. The same here in England, I'm sure,
Well, actually, I wanted to ask you, I wanted to kind of go off topic a little bit, because the Northern Irish protocol, I'm sure, is making headlines on both sides, if you like, of the water. It's been a particularly difficult thing for us, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah.
In Northern Ireland, and it's potentially causing political turmoil, or certainly has the potential to do so. I was just wondering, from your side, what kind of stuff you're hearing. Is it affecting life there with you at the moment?
It's not in the same way it's affecting Northern Ireland, not at all. So now I think the media are not doing a great job of reporting all of the problems that a large amount of what I hear about it are through people I know living in Northern Ireland talking about it in social media, for example. I think it's hard, isn't it? And it's hard not to talk about this without swearing, to be honest with you, because Brexit is just such a mess, and I think so. What we're focusing on here in England is much more, food prices here are, and I don't know if that's the same in Northern Ireland. Food prices here are going to be up by about 17% by the end of this year. I mean, it's just shocking.
I mean, food prices with us are certainly on the increase, but it's really, It's also about the availability of goods.
Yes, and that's what I've heard. That's the bit that I've really picked up on for you guys. I mean, it's just shambolic, isn't it? I think that's the only comment I can make in it, really. It's just dreadful.
I mean, for us, it's not even just food. I mean, there are literally, if you go on the internet to order something now.
That's right, yeah.
I'm sorry, the costs are prohibitive now. And me getting back almost to the writing for a little bit, I had wanted to use, that kind of, it's like a roll of wallpaper, but it's actually a whiteboard surface, and you can literally stick it to any wall.
Yes.
And I would use those. I have it kind of just beside me here, huge big glass fronted wardrobes, and I tend to cover them. And that's my plotting and planning space. And I went to buy some new roll, and it was something like 8 times the amount.
God, that's just shocking, isn't it?
It's horrendous. And then in the end, the company had said, actually, you know what, we're not even going to deliver it to you. So what's the point? So yeah, it's having lots of issues for us. But actually, getting back to our out about identity. It's creating a lot of identity issues.
Well, yeah, I was thinking it must do, and it's strange, isn't it? I mean, it really emphasizes the physical distance, doesn't it, between this island and the island that Northern Ireland is on?
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of my work is actually, without my writer hat being on, a lot of my work is based in Liverpool. So I would have been back and forward quite a bit. I can't do that now, obviously, with the COVID situation. But I'm finding that the people in Liverpool aren't really getting the degree of what's going on.
No, I don't think that. I don't think people here are, to be honest with you.
And for us,
not at all.
That kind of highlights a view, certainly in some elements of the community, that we never really mattered in the first place.
Yeah.
And this is just yet another example of why we don't matter. So there are people that are thinking that certainly from a Protestant background, there are a lot of people who are thinking that their identity is being eroded away. And
I can really understand that, actually.
Again, it's just, almost the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of identity being eroded away. And then there are others thinking, are the Conservative government trying to push a united Ireland? And obviously, for some elements of the community, that's something that would be welcomed. For others, it's not. So we have the whole identity thing kind of boiling over, as well as the economic factors. And it's just kind of a bit of a crucible for us that I don't know if the Conservative government know, or if it's very conscious in their part. But
I guess it's this ongoing problem, isn't it? That and I imagine, if we're thinking again about identity, what I'd be really interested in is there must be so many common experiences between all of the people living in the 3 devolved nations. I think that's where the separation is really between Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, and England. I think people in the devolved nations feel very separate from this country in many, many ways. And I think what you said about people in Northern Ireland feeling forgotten, I have friends in Wales and Scotland, and that's something that echoes very much how they feel as well.
And I think that's something that probably is coming out a lot in writing at the moment as well. I mean, certainly in Northern Ireland, there are quite a few crime series coming out, or some of the books have been released, and they seem to be looking at the conflict, but in a different way. I mean, we've all heard about Trouble's Trash, and how that was a thing for a while, and how publishing frowned upon it, and possibly rightly so. But now we have certainly in Northern Ireland, there are a lot of new voices out there about it again. And I don't think it's any great coincidence that it's happening now at this time with Brexit and all that sort of stuff. So, it's interesting because it's just another I suppose, another way that crime fiction deals with very real everyday issues, which, we know.
Well, I think, I don't know about you, James, but for me, one of the reasons I feel so comfortable writing crime fiction is that it gives you a great structure within which you can explore anything. And I always think I didn't choose crime fiction chose me. But I think it just gives us such a good structure, and within that structure we can explore anything we want to, anything that interests us in politics or human relationships.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think certainly from my point of view, it's not always something that we consciously do. It just seems to be there within us. And I know there are sometimes that makes the book really easy to write, and other ways, like myself at the moment, that it makes it really difficult to write.
It always is difficult. But as we're talking about, as I'm talking, I'm wondering, is that why so many Irish writers are drawn to crime fiction? Because it gives us that format for exploring these complex issues of identity and history and our relationship with the countries around us as well. I think it's a great place to do that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that even to kind of segregate Northern Ireland, no pun intended, the number of new writers coming along from Northern Ireland, that just seems to be on the increase.
And is that writers writing crime fiction?
Right, yeah, completely.
Amazing.
And it seems to be something that, we're not just dealing with the issues of the past and trying to work our way through them. We're also, I think, dealing with the fact that we're just, I say just flippantly, another big city in the UK with all the troubles and all the problems that a big metropolitan area would have.
Isn't it going to be interesting in 5 years to see what Northern Irish writers are writing about based on what you've said about the Northern Irish Protocol and how people are feeling and how it's making them feel very alienated from the rest of the UK? And
yeah, I wonder, is it something that will find its way very overtly in?
I think it will.
Or is it going to be just almost like a subculture? Because I know when COVID was at its, I was going to say at its peak, maybe at its strongest is a better way of putting it. Lots of people were kind of saying, well, I'm never going to write about this. And I would have to say I was one of them, because the UK, the world is going through this pandemic, and the last thing anyone's going to want to hear about or read about when we've finished is the pandemic, because we're living through it.
Well, you see, you're right, we're living through, and I think that we are not psychologically ready to write about it yet. I think we don't realize it, but we're still very traumatized by what we are still going through. And in a way, I see that as being very similar to what's happened in Northern Irish. Like that explosion of crime fiction about the Troubles didn't happen when you were in the middle of the Troubles, did it?
No,
that writing came afterwards. And I think that's the same with this. I think this will be written about when we feel ready to write about it, but I don't think we're ready yet.
Yeah.
I'm not anyway.
I think it's probably in some ways actually finding its way into people's writing, but not in an overt, I'm going to write about COVID. I think it's more about, the way that you were talking earlier on about writing the process, where you are, and not just geographically where you are, but psychologically where you are as well.
Well, exactly. And because I have thought a lot that COVID is the perfect time to write a locked room murder mystery, but no one's done it, and there's a reason for that. And I think you're right. Psychologically, we're not ready to explore that space yet.
It might be a very good novel when it comes out, but it's a while off yet. Speaking of good novels coming out, what are you working on at the moment?
So I'm working on my 4th D novel, which will be out sometime next year. But more excitingly and more imminent than that is this book called The Lucky Eight is coming. It's being published on Thursday, 22nd of July. So I'm very, very excited about that. And this is my first standalone crime novel, not part of a series, which makes it twice as exciting for me, if no one else.
So tell us, I see the premise on the cover there. Tell us a wee bit about it.
So the idea is it's a whodunit. I really wanted to set out to write kind of a sort of modern whodunit. It's about a group of people who survived a plane crash, and 5 years later they gather to remember the 5-year anniversary of the crash. They gather to remember those who died in the crash. And one of them is killed, and then another one is killed, and it looks as if somebody's killing off the survivors. And the book is about why and the secrets. All of the characters have sort of secrets and things they want to keep hidden, as all characters in whodunits do.
I know you're saying it's a modern twist, but the way you've spoken about it, it sounds very Poirot-esque.
It was very influenced. As a teenager, my introduction to crime fiction was Agatha Christie, probably like loads of people. And so I think that those classic whodunits really influenced the book. I've always wanted to write something. As my writing's developing as a crime writer, I really like the idea of writing plots that are complex, and I love the idea that a classic part of a whodunit is that the reader's trying to solve the mystery along with the fictional detective, and that was something I wanted to do. I'm not a great fan of twists that are thrown in at the last minute that the reader didn't see coming. The reader has to reach the end of my book and feel that they could have worked out the plot, but they just weren't able to do it. If that makes sense.
That's part of the fun. That's what crime readers like. That's why they consume the genre so much.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll see. It's getting well received so far, but it's early days, isn't it? And it's so nerve-wracking when a book's coming out, isn't it? It's just, I'm on the edge of my seat the whole time.
Well, I'm kind of at the stage now where the trilogy obviously is complete. I may go back to what I call Farce Investigations, which is the kind of umbrella organization around it. But what I'm finding now was that I got really nervous because the first 2 books did really well. People were anticipating the third one a lot. And as I was writing it, I was getting social media messages saying, when's this going to be out? We're waiting for it. And I was thinking, am I up to this? Because this is the last book in a trilogy, so therefore should be building to a climax. And at one point, actually, it was during the pandemic, at one point I was reading through it and I thought, this isn't good enough. And I literally had to take huge swathes of it out and rewrite. Now, thankfully, the finished product is, I think, a worthy end.
Good.
And the feedback so far, like yourself, has been brilliant. So I'm really happy with
it. And is that book out already, James, or is it?
It is. It's the entire trilogy is out now. The last part of the trilogy, Dark Light, which is behind me, I think, here.
Yes, I can see it. Yeah.
So it came out in November, just last year.
Oh, okay. So quite recently.
But what I'm finding is I'm having to do lots of kind of social media work around it still, because people who are only new to the trilogy are they've maybe read all the 3 books at once, and now they're waiting to hear what happens next or what I'm going to do next. Or there have been people that have been there from the start who now want more. And you're thinking, okay, well, I've started a new project, but what am I going to do? So I've been doing lots of kind of little side things about, the inspiration behind the building and the inspiration behind some of the characters and so on, just to give people their Farce Investigations fix.
So you said it's based in a primary school. Is that the kind of the fiction? Is that the primary school you went to?
It's West Belfast. It was up until very recently, it was a very, rundown, derelict, abandoned building, but a really pretty building as well. And I used to drive past it literally, 2 or 3 times a week to visit family in West Belfast. And I always thought, there's something should be done about that place. And, it'd be such a nice place to set a story around. But of course, then that was my crime writer origins coming into fruition then. And of course, I looked at one particular part of the building one day and thought, you could write a really good murder scene around there. Which is what I did, and that's where it took off. And I have to say, a lot of the people watching this would be familiar with the building that I'm talking about. And it is actually undergoing a huge renovation project at the moment, and is going to reopen as something that I really feel quite strongly about as well. It's going to be almost like a visitor centre, but within it, there's going to be a hub of supporting community interest companies.
Okay.
So, it's really getting back to the heart of the community. And
it's not being turned into apartments, thank God.
No, exactly. So I, as you know, I'm one of the directors of the Northern Ireland Festival of Writing, and we aim to kind of bring on new writers aspiring and emerging, and very much people who've been disenfranchised. Very much about the whole community interest kind of thing. So my first question when I heard about the redevelopment of the school was, is there going to be a community, aspect to it? The answer to that was yes, which I was delighted with. And my second question was is there going to be a shop? I wonder why. So yeah, we'll have to think commercially too. But yeah, thankfully I'm going to be involved in the opening of that.
Great, that sounds brilliant.
And so on. So
when will that be open then?
I think it's February. They're looking at February at the moment, but because of Brexit, as we were talking about earlier on, they're having problems at the moment actually getting building supplies in.
Goodness.
And I think from chatting to some of the people behind it, they were saying what has actually happened was the US have actually foreseen the idea that Brexit is going to cause problems within the building trade. They bought up a lot of the stock so that is they're kind of monopolizing the market a little bit at the moment.
Gosh.
But saying that February is the current deadline. So we're hoping, fingers crossed.
I'll have to come and visit when I'm next in Belfast. I love Belfast.
Yeah, we would love to have you. I would certainly love to take you on a tour. In fact, we have over here. We have a crime fiction walking tour.
Really?
Yeah. Because a lot of the obviously things like Line of Duty and all that sort of stuff is filmed here. So we have one of the other local crime writers, a guy called Simon Maltman, who's a friend of mine as well. He literally meets with groups in the city.
Gosh, what a great idea!
Around, but unfortunately, some of the other crime writers, including myself, joke him about it because the nature of his tour means that he has to kind of stay within the city centre.
Right.
Some of us write about, I would be just outside the city centre. He would have to take them an extra maybe 20-minute detour out of their way just to see a derelict building. Or a building site, as it now is. So yeah, we joke about that. But yeah, we would love to have you and take you on the tour. And I'll obviously do the extended bit myself.
That sounds great. I'll hold you to that now because I love Belfast. I go there whenever I can.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we would love to. In fact, I would love to have you over for the Festival of Writing as well. So we could certainly get our heads together.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'd love that.
Do something. But on that note, our time is kind of starting to run out a little bit. So for the viewers, Sheila, how do people find out more about you? Or more importantly, how do they get your books?
So you can get my books from anywhere. They're available in all formats, ebook, paperback, audio. If you don't want to buy them, they're always available in the libraries. I always want to support libraries. Otherwise, I'm Amazon, all the bookshops. I've got a website, sheilabugler.co.uk, and I'm on Facebook and Twitter. You can find me very easily. I'm very lucky. I've got a very unusual name. There's not many of me out there, so...
That's true, yes. And I must confess that I did have to ask you once how to pronounce it.
Most people do.
And from my point of view, guys, I'm www.jamesmurphywriter.org. My books are available in all the local bookstores. In fact, you'll get some signed copies in there as well. And the usual places, Amazon and so on. And I'm also across social media as James Murphy Books. But for now, thank you for watching, and thank you to Sheila for what was a really interesting and lively conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you so much.